tightening international security policy up, that everybody, you know, in all these other countries, they're not always on board with what we want.
Absolutely. Recently, I traveled to Switzerland, and I flew Swiss Air. Didn't have to take, when I came back through Swiss security, didn't have to take off my shoes. And then on the plane, they served me with regular forks and knives, real forks and knives. Silver, real silver. You know, it's a very different standard, and yet we expect the world to conform to our standards, and it's just not the case, which is exactly what happened here. The guy wasn't picked up because we don't know if we would have caught him in our airports, but we obviously would have had a much better chance. And then Times Square. So again, this guy succeeded. He succeeded. He got to the venue with the weapon. It didn't go off because he screwed up, but he succeeded. Portland street lighting. This guy he would have succeeded also, except it was a sting. The FBI set up a sting with the guy, and but he wanted to park a truck outside of a religious ceremony in Portland and kill everybody who was at the tree lighting ceremony. Again, self-radicalized, inspired by non-structure. San Francisco, like Texas, wanted to put explosives in the bottom of a tower, federal tower, take down federal assets. Again, inspired by non-structured, local guy. Now, we're all focused on terrorism. But at a certain point in time as a society, do we really care how we die? Isn't a threat a threat, regardless of where it comes from? And I think we have a blind spot. This is our blind spot. February 14th. Now this is obviously after. This is school shootings, obviously, but this is after West Virginia. And this is obviously not working. We just go through these. Go through another one. Now these just happened. These just happened. So, are we coordinating our security efforts to include school shootings? And that's what I'm going to talk about when we get to the intelligence section. A lot of the same type of information, same type of precursor events, the pre-operational stuff, applies to both a school shooting and a terrorist event. The difficulty with both is that, particularly if you have a self-radicalized individual, you don't know when the switch got flipped. And the same thing with someone who decides to do a school shooting. So we have to get much better at trying to meld in our mental health issues in our society with our law enforcement issues. Very, very difficult. Very, very tricky. All right. And this is as I said beforehand, this was Mumbai. You know, if you go through some of the specifics of this attack, it was truly diabolical. One of the aspects that got me was that they went into the train station, firing to the air, not even shooting at people, so they would disperse all the passengers. And then they took IEDs and put them underneath the luggage, so that when first responders came, or just to reopen the station, and they lifted up the luggage, they would detonate them. What we're seeing more and more, particularly we've seen in the Middle East for a while, is the secondary attack. We wait. You get people into the killing zone. You detonate one set of explosives, and then you wait for folks to come and rescue them. And that has a tremendous psychological impact. We saw that in Iraq and Afghanistan. It's going to cause people to hesitate going into a scene. Yes.
That was one of the specific incidents here in New York City, which highlighted that. When we had the Brooklyn individual, this is back in the Giuliani administration, that set off let's just say, a fire device in the subway system on Lower Manhattan, right below City Hall. And it's one of the things that got the mayor of the city of New York energized to create an independent OEM here in the city. All right, because he was afraid of exactly what Mike was talking about, and that's that secondary device. All right, so those words not only rang true in Mumbai, but they rang true here in New York City as well.
And the other thing, the other aspect of this that was also diabolical was, in a military event, in a firefight, one thing you want to do is you want to disperse the defenders. and you don't want to provide them with one target so they can apply force. So what they did in Mumbai was they took the improvised explosive devices and they went into a cab, put a gun to the head of the cab driver and said, just drive. And then he said, all right, stop here, let me out. As they exit the cab, they leave an ID in the cab. And then the driver just goes off and randomly detonates someplace else. And that now takes the attention of the defenders and applies it to that area that has nothing to do with this. You know, just one quick diversion. I had a personal experience with how that type of misinformation can change the entire tempo of an operation. I was involved in a state police shooting. It was one of the agencies I used to oversee in Margaretville, New York. It was a police officer, a trooper got shot in a traffic stop. The guy then took off with a van. They were searching for him. They thought he was in one particular area, but then they got a bizarre call that there had been a carjacking about 20 miles away. And so all the Resource State Police went to that scene. But in fact, the guy was still right around the corner from where the original shooting happened. And what happened was that they dispersed the resources and they wound up with a firefight at a farmhouse. But again, you know, it's so hard to determine what is going to happen during an operation, during an event. And that's what the bad guys, want to do. They want to disrupt the tempo of defense. Well, this is a great clip that talks about some CNN that they just pulled out a cache of information just recently that talked about how guys in Al-Qaeda are planning a Mumbai-style attack in a major city in the West. And that's what this clip. Okay. So, threat continuum. Obviously, you can see that it's changed in nature, and when I said at the very beginning, it could change back because it's a cycle. But this is so hard. The self-radicalized guys, they have no contact with law enforcement. So it's so hard to pick them up before they can do that, unless you catch them on a video system. Transit is the target. That's conclusive. Why? Because you can get the biggest bang for your buck from the visual side of it. This should give people pause, because the press really isn't focusing on this. There is increasing activity. And again, it's from the self-radicalized. Weapons of choice, very simple. Very, very simple. Whatever they can lay their hands on. And, you know, we've all talked about the fact that the web has so many recipes for how to make a bomb. And we kind of say, you know, it's there, what are we going to do? Well, not only are there a lot of recipes, but they're getting more sophisticated. And people, every time we have an event that doesn't work, it's a training event. It's a teachable moment for the folks who might want to do something. So they get better at mixing the different chemicals for the peroxide-based bomb. So here's the timeline. And of course, I did not include the school shootings. Okay. Domestic intelligence. Still a huge issue. I hope all of you get a chance, if you're interested in intelligence, I would urge you to read George Orwell's 1984. Remember from high school? I read it when I first took this job, and I'm telling you, it's so eerie as to where we're headed as a society. And it's almost the same justifications. Society, security. Here is the intelligence cycle versus the... We can go back, please. People are upset when civil rights, particularly here in New York City, when civil rights raises their head and they say, you know, let's question what the police department has done. I appear on Fox News and I talk about stop and frisk policy for the New York City Police Department, about their use of intelligence assets, and I defend them. But I also defend the need for a group like the ACLU to question what we're doing. You've got to have a full and fair debate as to what constitutes liberty, what constitutes protection, in my opinion. You just cannot give up and say, you know what, we're going to make everybody safe, but nobody's going to have any rights or liberties. It's just, then we let the bad guys win. So here's the difference in the last two bullets between law enforcement and intelligence. And even 11 years afterwards, we have not still fixed that issue. And if you go and talk to some of the leaders in the FBI, they'll tell you the FBI's mission is very different than the counterterrorism mission. And yet Congress has foisted that upon them, said, you're the chief counterterrorism agency in the United States, while still maintaining your responsibility to go and investigate crimes, arrest individuals, and develop cases for their ultimate boss, the U.S. Attorney. So do just a comparison. We could probably do side-by-side screens, but here's the first one. If you study intelligence, you know that the way it works is very orderly. You decide what you need to know. Then you go out, and that's a requirement. Now you say to your agencies, go collect. And by the way, as you know, there are 16 intelligence agencies in the United States that spend over $100 billion a year just in intelligence gathering. You then go and when all sources, whether it's electronic, whether it's personal, human-based assets, whether it's wiretaps, you get all the information back, and then you do an analysis. And the analysis is based upon the requirements. And then you produce a product. And then you give it to decision makers, and then they decide what to do with it. And eventually, from the CIA perspective, that winds up in the President's daily briefing as to what they need to know. Law enforcement is reactive. Law enforcement event happens. Now you're going to have to go and collect against that event. You're going to have to investigate it. But again, you're always reactive, and there's no strategic analysis as to what you need to know. What do you need to know? The guy knocked over a liquor store. What gun did he have? Were there any witnesses? Did anyone get injured? How much money was taken? Those are all reactive reactive analysis that you need to do. And then, of course, you build a case. So, go back for a second. The point is that the intelligence cycle and the law enforcement investigative cycle are very different. And yet we expect police officers at every level to be able to discern that, to make that differentiation. And the hardest thing about the counterterrorism mission, it is supposed to prevent an attack. Could you imagine if you said to the police department of your local town, prevent crime, every single crime? Well, say, yes, certainly there are strategies that have been employed very successfully in terms of preventing crime, but that's not really their mission. They can go after certain elements of crime, but it can't truly prevent crime. Can we truly prevent a terrorist event from happening? Go ahead. So these are the problems that we have. In the first bullet, we spend so much time going after the aspiration. We get so much time, woulda, shoulda, coulda, and yet if we don't, and an event happens, then it's gotcha. You should have picked up what was going on, and you didn't. Therefore, you're responsible. Okay. Additional obstacles. There is way too much information. You know that. There's so much information out there. The old thing, if it's not a needle in a haystack, it's a needle in a haystack of needles. It's so incredibly true. And remember, as much as we think we have this robust intelligence community here domestically, we don't, from the standpoint of developing actionable, real-time intelligence. You never get a product that says, okay, at 2 o'clock this afternoon, we're going to have people trying to do this. They're going to be going, but we don't get that. And yet we spend so much of our resources trying to chase that out. What's the information out there? Day job, crime. If that goes up, then you're as a police department, you're seen as a failed mission. It's not actionable or timely. And then there are institutional. These last 3 bullets are about the practical day-to-day issues. I oversaw the New York State Intelligence Center, the NICE. And I learned these lessons. New York City has a great intelligence network. And you know what? They spend a lot of time, money, and effort, and they're not sharing unless you can bring something to the table. They're not just there to socialize with you. They've got too much at stake for what they're doing. So if you can provide something that they need, that you can develop a partnership. Short of that, if you're just another reporter or a repeater, the intelligence, you're not going to get to the same type of level. And Ray Kelly jealously guards his operation because he's put so much time and effort in developing it. And yet, how can you expect surrounding counties or states to develop that same type of intelligence with that same type of intensity or resource commitment? And information is, in fact, power. And that's how you maintain your hold on the resources. Public engagement. So, go to the last question. You know these programs. Do these really work? Can anyone tell me of a tip that came into the terrorism tip line that actually resulted in an arrest? Does anybody know of any instance?
How about our friend the veteran in Times Square who was selling selling his wares right on the street, and he had a tip that closed the case on the Times Square guy, right? Didn't he make the ID?
He was the one who went and said, I see a car smoking.
But that's all right.
He called 911.
Okay.
Not terrorism tip line.
Oh, okay.
Yes.
Did the Edinburgh bomber's father contact the local intelligence, or I seem to remember he got involved somewhere in the intelligence cycle.
But I don't think he called the terrorism tip line. I think he called it an
Well,
agency.
he would have been a foreign national, so whatever, yeah.
My point is that I don't know of anything that came into the terrorism tip line and actually resulted in an arrest.
Okay.
Why does that matter? Because we engage the public. You get on a train, what do you hear? See something, say something. All the time. See something. We have put enormous resources into this. And yet we haven't seen that kind of return on investment. The question is, do we stop it? No? Yes?
You see something, say something. I've seen it work, but it's not necessarily calling the terrorist tip line. Does it really matter if someone calls the terrorist tip line or 911, and is it our responsibility to make sure the 911 operator knows that field those calls?
Mm-hmm. Do you have a specific instance in mind?
Well, I know it happened in New Jersey.
And if you didn't have the See Something, Say Something campaign out there, would that have happened anyway?
I don't know.
See, I guess my question, there's no real answer to this, because we have to do something to try to engage the public. I was a great advocate about this, particularly following the days of 9/11. People felt like they were powerless. You have to give people an investment, a buy-in into the system itself. But I'm going to argue now that you can't just create a program and let it run. You have to reevaluate it. You have to evolve it. You have to do it in different ways. People understand that personal safety needs their involvement, but just to throw out the terrorist tip line, I mean, it was like the whole thing at the airports, where if somebody has given you something, don't carry it on the plane. I mean, at a certain point, it's like putting your seatbelt on. Here's how the buckle flips into the flap. I mean, after a certain point in time, the public sits there and says, "What do you think, we're stupid?" And you get cynical, and they realize that all they're doing is just checking the box on security, and that erodes confidence. That you have a proactive, evolutionary, inspirational thinking that goes behind the billions of dollars we are applying to this threat. Obviously, it's an editorial comment.